The sources of Indian law are divided into primary sources and secondary sources. Primary sources are legislation, precedent, customs, and personal law, while secondary sources are justice, equity, good conscience, common law principles, merchant law, and principles of equity. Hello and welcome back to Arthapada. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the secondary sources of Indian law. Secondary sources of Indian law are principles which are applicable only when primary sources of Indian law don't exist. What are the secondary sources? The first one is justice, equity, and good conscience. In the absence of any custom or legislation, the Indian court should apply the principles of justice, equity, and good conscience. Instead of dismissing the same, the courts will instead apply the principles of justice, equity, and good conscience. Such a discourse has been followed since the start of the British administration in India, where Royal Charters of England specified that if a law was silent on any matter, the courts could apply these principles. Even after independence, the Supreme Court in Gurunath v. Kamalabai held that in the absence of any rule of Hindu law, the courts have the authority to decide cases on the principles of justice, equity, and good conscience, unless, in doing so, the decision would become repugnant to or inconsistent with any doctrine of Hindu law. This became a very important precedent, validating the need for secondary sources of Indian law if the need arose. Since Indian law principles are an adaptation of English law or British law, the following also constitute a secondary source of Indian law. Common law is a name given to a set of legal principles which have been evolved by judges over many years. Just like customs are the unwritten law in our country, common law is the unwritten law of England. And since India has adapted the laws of England, these rules are also applied to Indian courts. So we can say that common law is basically a set of legal principles which is a combination of customs, judicial decisions, and interpretations in textbooks of law. Merchant law is basically a compilation of all the customs and trade usages which are binding on traders in their dealings with each other and their commercial activity. In today's age, there exists legislation to govern all commercial activity. However, if there is no legislation, in the sense primary sources, then this merchant law will be applicable. The principle of equity is another source of secondary law. In many cases where there is no remedy in common law courts, the people could approach the king in council, who would then refer this matter to the chancellor. The chancellor wouldn't apply the rigid principles of common law. Instead, he would apply the principles of justice, equity, and good conscience. In India, if an accused person has been awarded a death sentence, and the same death sentence has been upheld even by the Supreme Court, then we can say that all the remedies have been exhausted. At that time, the accused person has one final remedy. That is, he can petition the President of India to have his sentence reduced. The President has this power under Article 72 of the Indian Constitution. At the time of commuting such a death sentence, he is not bound to adhere to the same strict principles of law which the courts have to apply. In this news clipping, you can see that the President commuted the death sentence of a Balwant Singh, who was convicted over the assassination of the then Punjab Chief Minister, and this was done as a humanitarian gesture ahead of the 550th birth anniversary celebrations of Sikh founder Guru Nanak. The President does not need to apply the well-established principles of law that the courts are bound by. Such a petition can only be made after all other remedies have been exhausted. The equity courts acts on two maxims, and that is, he who seeks equity must do equity, and he who comes to equity must come with clean hands. If you found this video to be interesting, do click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon for personalized notifications from my channel.